So my next question is, how do rewards and praise, sometimes we want to reward our kids and praise them. So how do rewards and praise really take away from our kids living their true purpose in life?
That's a great question, and I think a common one, and one that parents we don't really think about because many of us are on autopilot with the
Mm-hmm.
praise. So when we externally validate our children, this can sometimes take away from their innate joy in something. And
Right.
there have been some really great studies on this, and at the forefront is a man named Alfie Kahn. Have you heard of Alfie Kahn?
No, I haven't actually.
No, okay. And he wrote a great article for Time magazine and as well as other publications. And one of his articles is the 5 reasons to stop saying good job. And great name. And this article's on my website. So if anyone wants to check it out, they can go to busymoms with an S community.com and they can check out this article. Very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And it's actually one of my most read articles from him. And so his article talks about how the inherent goodness of an activity can be deflated when we praise our children. And so more supportive responses might be to watch and pay good attention with really keen interest, like with
Mm-hmm.
our eyes or body language, or commenting something like something more subjective, like "Wow, when I see you painting, I feel really happy." So expressing how we feel about something versus an external validation.
Right.
And sometimes we use praise as fillers, as we don't have the time or good attention for our children that we like. So we fill the space with words or praise like, "Oh, that's great, sweetie," while we're doing something else, while we're clicking away on our iPhone, right?
Of course.
So by watching our children with good, loving attention and really reveling in their marvelousness, this can be felt by our children because children are intuitive beings. At the risk of sounding too woo-woo, children are highly intuitive and they can feel our energy, so they can feel we don't need to even sometimes say something.
Mm-hmm.
And another kink, which can also come up, is that the child associates praise with a certain action or activity, and then they do it again and again in order to get that same response, right?
Mm-hmm.
A great example of this is I'm training our dog right now, and you better believe that treats are a great inspiration for him to do something, and he associates that treat with that action, right? So he's going
Of
to do
course.
it again and again. So an important point to keep in mind is really stepping back and allowing our children to enjoy something without interfering with our own judgments, right,
Mm-hmm.
or perceptions. Another thing that comes to mind is when we make a big deal about something our children do or we really wow it. So this can take away from our children's experience and it can become about us.
Mm-hmm.
And it can also pull them out of the moment when they're deeply engrossed in that activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so many of us parents are so used to interfering that this is something that we really have to be super diligent about. And it's also a cultural thing. Like we lived in India for a year last year, and my son went to school there, and it was very interesting to see how parents parented and how things were done. They were very laid back. And there was very minimal interference. 2-year-old kids were walking themselves to the neighbor's house, and 3, 4-year-olds were walking to school. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like very minimal interference. But in our culture, we tend to really kind of overdo it, myself included.
Right.
So sometimes, there's that opportunity to step back. And there's also another great woman who does interesting work on this, and her work is Free Range Kids. Have you heard of it, Dr.
No.
Gray? No, okay, very interesting stuff. She used to send her kids, I think in New York City. I mean, correct me if I'm off, if there's any listeners that have heard this and I'm not exact on my facts, but she let her children take the subway in New York, and there was kind of a big uproar about her doing this. But her work is really around, in a safe container, allowing our kids to have more freedom. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, just listening to that, something that pops up for me, it's a little bit of a side note to what we're talking about right now, but it's very much a part of what I focus on, particularly with this business. Usually what I find when there's a praise and reward happening in a dynamic with children, purely because I've experienced this myself and I can see the implications of that, plus I've worked with a lot of people and can see the implications in their lives as well, and we've been able to work through that. But what I find is when parents, of no fault of their own, I sometimes do this too, and I kind of catch myself sometimes with my nephews and my nieces. what happens is when we praise and reward kids, without knowing that we're doing so, we're almost, without sounding a little bit too harsh about it, we put them on a pedestal, and the pedestal is more it's more like a subtle thing that's happening. But what can happen is anytime there's this reward and praise, and we put a child on a pedestal, what happens is, like you said, kids are very intuitive, so they're amazing. They've got amazing feeling energy, and that's just because they're very receptive and very open, and don't have a lot of baggage like we do as adults. And so what happens is when they start interacting with other people outside of the family dynamic, that praise and reward that might have been coming at them over and over again for quite a substantial period of the early periods of their life can be projected towards other children, subconsciously, I guess, if you want to look at it from that point of view. And this is one of the key points, the key factors that plays a role in the bullying dynamic. And it's part of the attractor from the other side of the dynamic that I guess creates a little bit of challenge that comes towards kids to help get them humble again and back to their authentic space. And I found this quite a lot in that dynamic, that happens at home where there's a lot of praise and reward going towards a certain child, and they tend to be the child predominantly that gets challenged most in their lives, usually at school with a bully or something like that. So as much as we feel it's assisting them, it can sometimes and often have the opposite effect, which in its own way can serve them and assist them in life. But I guess my approach is always to try and work within the framework of the child rather than within the framework of our own ideas of the way they should be.
Yeah, great. I love that.
So, yeah, that's just the way I understand reward and praise, just from that point of view. So it was a little bit of a side note, but I'm that's all I have to say about that for now. Okay.
So
my next question is, can you give me 3 of the most effective and powerful ways that you know of that we can use to inspire our kids?
Okay. So I'd like to give parents some practical tools, because this is all good in theory, but the rubber meets the road when we put this information into practice, right? So the first way, and I mentioned it earlier, a really powerful way to inspire our children is by connecting with our own calling and purpose. So by taking this step, we set the tone for our kids. And again, this doesn't have to be a dramatic step. Simply by taking one action, this can be the catalyst. So for example, planning time for a class that interests you, yoga, dance, crafts, simply carving out that time and exploring some activities that might interest you. And I talk about this more in my parenting program as well. I go into greater depth. But so I used to think that dramatic change would come from doing something big or huge or altering my life dramatically. But the truth is that the biggest change can really come from those small steps that we do every day and doing them over and over again. So an exercise to get parents started on finding their purpose is I get my moms to make a list of things that they really enjoy doing. So for example, taking a walk in the forest or having a bubble bath with candles, whatever those things are, just simple pleasures. And then I would ask, if the listeners want to do this as well, they can circle the top 3 things that they really love the most, that they really enjoy the most, and then finding one of those things that they can incorporate and carving out time once a week to do it. So, and I also suggest, you can't have a bath for 10 minutes and then run out of the tub, or go on a walk and then come home early because your husband called you to cook a pot roast, something like that.
Right. Of course.
So finding, or being the husband on the walk and the wife, vice versa. So finding something you love and doing it will really open the doors for you to find out about what your interests are and what you like and what are some of life's joys. So that being said, a second important and powerful way to inspire our kids is by opening our children's eyes to the many different possibilities, such as sports and dance and writing, and not limiting their interests to our interests, right? Making that inventory that we talked about above. Or if our child indicates an interest in something, supporting them in that and even participating, right?
Right.
Thirdly, listening closely to what our children have to say. So reading between the lines, asking questions, and then really listening without interruption. So you like to play tag at school. That's awesome. What do you like about it? Wow, you loved swimming today. You seem to really have fun. And then wait, see what they respond. By listening closely to our children's interests, we can come up with creative ways to fulfill them. And another example with my son in the video games is, since he loves being on the computer, I offer him extra time during the week when we can sit together and look up educational games, such as math. Right now, he's doing a wonderful kids computer programming game that he's learning to program, and he initiated it himself. He was really interested in that.
Wow.
And he's really lighting up when he's doing these activities. And again, this isn't my top choice, but it's his, and I need to respect that. And if I want to have a close relationship with him now, and especially in the teen years, right, I need to take on board what he's saying, what he's needing, and as you said, Greg, about the value system, right?
Absolutely.
So getting interested in your kids, and this is so important, this is such a preparation for teenagers. Children can pick up on those subtle and not so subtle cues of our interest levels. And so take some time. I just suggest to the parents taking some time and finding out what their kids are interested in. Yeah.
Right. Those are fantastic tools. You've mentioned a lot of theoretical sides of that in the questions before. So those are definitely things that I would agree would certainly help parents work towards inspiring their children to fulfill themselves. So thank you for sharing those. And my final question, my last question to you, which might be a question that some parents have on their minds. How does harsh discipline limit our children's creativity and impact their mission? Because a lot of parents believe that being really disciplinarians or authoritarians is necessary, and it needs to happen all the time, or even a lot of the time. So how does that harsh discipline limit our kids' creativity?
Great question. And just as an aside, when I was pregnant with my son, and I thought that I knew how I was going to parent. So I was going to rule with an iron fist, and I was going to be tough love and all this stuff, right? So I had this idea. And then an interesting thing happened to me. I was in a coffee shop one day, and I bumped into this man who saw I was pregnant, and he struck up a conversation with me, really interesting fellow, and he suggested that I read some good literature.
Right.
And the interesting thing was, my husband, he wrote down the names of the books, and we got the books. And by the way, it was Aletha Salter and Patty Whiffler, two of my most inspiring inspirations in the parenting world. And their views completely changed the way I felt about discipline. So after that, I started researching. I spent years and years researching for my book, and I started using practical and applicable tools, right? Because there's theory, and then there's actually, when the rubber meets the road, as I mentioned earlier. So my commitment to the world was really practicing and teaching positive and conscious parenting practices. And so I experimented with different tools, strategies to have a better relationship with my own child. And so besides the staggering amount of research out there on the negative effects of punishment, I find that for myself, when I use harsh discipline, it doesn't feel good or right in my heart. And this is also the case for many parents. That's why I get so many parents coming to me, and something just doesn't feel right to them about yelling or screaming or spanking or passive aggression. All of these things create an environment of fear. And in any environment of fear, there's little room for creativity, right? It can almost suck the energy or really stifle our creativity. So every time a child gets punished, their creativity shrinks a little more, and they feel less connected to themselves and to us. And so by using other techniques such as listening to feelings or connection time, natural giggles, and these are all tools I use in my own parenting program, these interactions create a great connection and flourishing as opposed to separation and fear. And so positive energy and encouragement helps to create and support an environment of sharing, exploration, and joy. And I'm not saying this to make anyone feel bad or wrong, because the reality is, facing our own reactions, like our own reactions in the midst of our child's strong feelings and emotions, is really difficult.
It is.
Yeah, it's not easy, but we do have a choice in every moment, and a choice to punish and disconnect, or we have a choice to reconnect and have that close relationship that we're really looking for. And again, it really just breaks down to that moment by moment, one little step at a time, one day at a time, right? And I know this is difficult. I know that in the heat of the moment, it's hard not to want to default to punishment, right? We're frustrated, you know, the kid's screaming, something's going on, and I provide a whole host of tools on my website, free tools to help parents with this. So to summarize, Dr. Greg, to support the flourishing and interest, I just want to give a brief summary of what we talked about.
Please.
Is number one, parents finding out what you're really interested in and taking the time to focus on you and your own life purpose. So as mom, dad, leading by example, setting the tone. And if you don't know where to start, you know, they can go to my website, or I'm sure your work has information on that as well. Getting involved. Number two, getting involved in your child's interest and hobbies. So whether you like them or not, respecting your child's interest and finding out more about what they're up to, just really getting involved. Number three, if our child is taking classes or lessons or anything for that matter, taking an inventory and asking ourselves, does my child love to do this? If not, why do I want him or her to do this? So inquiring deeper into our own selves. Right. And number four, practicing positive parenting practices so we can create an environment of support and creativity. And again, if any of the parents need help with that, they can get in touch with me. And I know, you know, it can be difficult. I can relate. I have been there. You know, I only have one child, and I have relatives and friends who have multiple kids, and I've taken care of them. And by the end of the day, my nerves are shot. So right. I know this can be really difficult, but there are tools out there. And I want to throw in a tip for this, because I have so much to say on this matter. But a really powerful tip is, like, in the heat of the moment, we always think that we have to do something with our kids. So, for example, our child's doing something naughty, you know, they're pulling on the dog's ears or doing something that we don't approve of. We always have a choice in the moment to do nothing. As parents, we always think we have to respond right away. But so, for example, if our child, our toddler, or even slightly older than toddler child is doing something it's not supposed to do, we could physically go over there, scoop our child up, you know, say, sweetie, you know, let's go over here and do something else, so possibly redirecting. And we don't necessarily have to do anything in that moment. So, for example, by us not yelling at our kid or teaching them right or wrong or all these other things, that's not going to make them a delinquent or some sort of criminal growing up. That's not true. And research has proven this, you know, and I've seen this with kids that I've worked with, and other parenting experts have worked with, that I've seen them kind of go through their lives, right? I've seen this actually in practice. So we don't always need to intervene and kind of, you know, step in and take that action. If we are concerned or if something doesn't feel right, we can just stop. You know, we can stop and we can take a moment for ourselves. And later, you know, the behavior is going to come up again. And so we have another time to go back to it. So really encouraging parents to really take that moment, in the moment of reaction and heat, because when our emotions are running high, you know, we're not in a great place to respond.
Absolutely.
Right. Because we're so triggered, you know, and I know that for myself. And usually what happens, like for myself, I find what happens if I react when I'm emotional, I always end up regretting it.
Absolutely.
So that's it in terms of those tools, and I'm not sure if we have. I think we're pretty much good for time, but yeah.
Yes, you've definitely given some amazing tools, some great insights, and you know, I just want to thank you again for sharing all your wisdom with me and all your experience with me and with all the other listeners that will be listening to this or are listening to this now. Ultimately, you know, we would all love to help our kids achieve their own individual missions. That's really what we'd love to do, particularly if we're engaging with kids and we have a connection with them. And the information you provided today is really, it's so relevant and it's relatively straightforward. And all the suggestions and actions you spoke about can really most certainly be applied quite easily. And as you said, you know, you take baby steps towards making things happen the way you'd like. So I think it's certainly achievable. And I believe that, you know, you're a pioneer for many working mums out there and parents out there, possibly even dads who are, you know, having their own challenges in the family dynamic. And I guess I look forward to sharing more of your invaluable content through what I do and having you be a part of the Be Who You Want to Be community of visionaries. So thank you again, and I look forward to sharing more of what you have to offer with
Awesome, Greg. Well, I'm so excited to be back, and I could do 100 calls on this kind of material, so I'm really excited to come back, and I love what you're creating. So, congratulations to you and to all the parents that are listening.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your call.
Great.